So you've probably seen on social media recently that plenty of people, including professional athletes, are jumping indoors and doing these crazy challenges on their indoor trainers, on the kickers, Zwift, etc. What is the psychology behind it? We're going to talk through all of that in today's video. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Nick here. We're talking through all of the science of endurance, performance, and sport science in general. Hopefully you've enjoyed some of the videos so far. Today's episode is all about some of the individual challenges that professional athletes and athletes in general that we've heard over the last little while have been taking on. Given we're in this isolation period, there's no racing. Most people in some of the countries overseas aren't able to go outside at all and train. Luckily here in Australia, we're still able to go outside and go for a run at the moment. Here in Melbourne, we're under some of the tighter restrictions in Victoria, so being able to still go out and run and still being able to do something outside and go and leave the house for a little bit is a bonus and nice, but not everyone has that luxury. So I just wanted to react to a few of the different challenges that we've seen and talk through some of the psychology behind it, because obviously it's very different from a going out and racing perspective, or even doing a race on your own, going out and do a training session outside. Very different to spend those big hours indoors on a treadmill, on a trainer, etc. So how are athletes getting through it, and what are some of the things that they're using to be able to push them through and still be able to and perform a high quality session in the day? So the first one I do want to react to is something that actually happened over the weekend, the Easter weekend here. Was Frodeno, the professional triathlete. If you're in triathlon, you know who he is, multiple time Ironman world champion. What he did was he did an Ironman within his home. So from what I understand, they're not really able to leave too much. So someone like him has to do 100% of his training indoors. Obviously, professional athlete, he has access to a pool, he has access to a treadmill, and he's got Zwift and a kicker and all that set up, and sponsorship obviously helps him out compared to the average person. But he went through and did a full Ironman to the 3.8k swim, 180k bike, and then the marathon run and finish, and still put out a pretty impressive time. But what he did, he's got one of these like turbo jets that basically turns his pool into like an endless swim spa type thing. So it pushes water against him, he swims into it. So essentially his body stays in the same position the entire time, but he's able to swim against a resistance. So it kind of turns his pool into like a treadmill for swimming. Swam 3.8Ks in there, and even someone like him, who's a highly trained athlete, he's probably one of the best we've seen in terms of triathlon and long course triathlon in particular, finished the 3.8K swim, got the tap on the shoulder from his wife saying, yeah, you're done, you need to move on to the bike now. He got out of the pool, and you can see it in his Instagram story that even he was like, yeah, glad that's over, because it was just so monotonous. He would have been looking at the same thing, even if he is sighting. At least in the open water, when you're racing, you can look at a buoy, you can look left, you can look right, you can see people around you. Type of thing in a pool, he's probably always looking at the same thing. Even if he looks left and right, he's always seeing the same part of the wall, the same part of his backyard. He's always looking at the same unit in front of him, even if he sights forward to keep his line in the pool. So it can be quite monotonous. So to be able to push through that, you've got to have a bit of sort of just mental ability just to keep driving and keep going to be able to get through that part in the first place. But it was good to see and refreshing to see the professional athlete even was like, yeah, that sucked. That was tough at the end of it. But then he moved on to the bike, and this is where things really start to change from a psychology perspective and how he kept motivated. Getting out onto the bike, you're going to be spending a lot more time on the bike, and they're riding for high 4 hours and things like that. So it's the type of thing that we need something to motivate us. And there's a couple of strategies he did use. Obviously, the headphones came in pretty early into the piece, so he's going to be listening to some sort of music to keep him motivated as he goes. Something like Zwift, really useful, and I find it really useful as well, is having the laptop or TV, whatever, set up in front of you. You can actually see yourself on the screen moving, and the avatar is moving and riding. There's people riding around you. He made comment at various times throughout that he was actually able to have a drafting effect. So he was riding on Zwift, and there's people riding in and around him, so he can sit on someone's wheel for a bit. So he's getting a bit of a draft effect, so that made it a little bit easier for him, even though he's still working hard. It's the type of thing that he was then able to, using the headphones and the computer setup, etc. He's able to ride on Zwift, and something they're not normally able to do in an Ironman is one, ride with music and headphones, and that part of motivation is taken out of it. So interesting sort of difference in that aspect. He actually gained a bit of a technique rather than having it sort of taken away traditionally. He was then able to talk to people. So he was doing live streams. I think at points on the cycle, he was doing chats with like Fabian Cancellara. He was riding with him. He was talking to his parents at one point. Other professional triathletes were getting on board and having a chat. So even that sort of social interaction where maybe those guys are riding past each other and having a quick chat on the way past about race tactics and things like that, and trying to help each other in the early stages of the race, or to catch breaks and things like that. This was a bit more just sort of social, a bit more casual, but also a lot more positive for him to receive and sort of take the pressure off. All right, I have to absolutely get to work now, and this is a race. It's a lot less stressful when everyone's sort of talking in more of a friendly way and a bit of a social. Another psychological aspect of that social inclusion is a really big one from a training perspective in particular, that if we can keep this connectivity even while in isolation, whether that's on Zoom or through Zwift or whatever it is, then at least it's going to provide a bit more motivation. And like I said, the music as well is also going to help. Another thing that you would have seen throughout his attempt is where he's set up in his house. Obviously, he's got the luxury of being a pretty nice house on the hilltop, got a beautiful view. All his stuff was set up in a room with big glass windows so he can look straight out. So even from that aspect, it's a pretty nice setting to be training in anyway. So you'd probably be wanting to train there. Something that I did see that was a little bit different, and watched a video from a little while back of Lionel Sanders setting up his home setup. There's no windows, things like that, very different setup. But what they did was they put a big mural on the side wall of him riding down the Queen K Highway in Kona, just to give him that bit of motivation. Every time he steps in that room, he's always thinking about Kona as the end goal, Kona as the end. Just the getting in that mindset every time is a different way of motivating, rather than looking out into a big, open, nice view that is very positive to look at. He's looking at that as a positive of this is my goal, and I'm constantly reminded that of every day. So two different ways of approaching it, from where your setup is and how you're setting up your room, to then achieve a really motivational sort of outcome specific to the individual. Very, very different strategies there. But it's just interesting to see the two different types of mindsets, the athletes of what they needed to do to adapt their rooms to give them the most amount of motivation possible. Obviously on the run then, Frodeno carried on, was chatting to people when he's running at 4:15 pace or 4:10 pace or whatever, something silly. He was having a conversation comfortably. Again, using the headphones and music and talking through various means to other people while he was running. It's still on Zwift, so people were able to run with him, so he could pace off others and things like that. Ended up putting out a pretty impressive time of 8 hours 33, I think was his overall time, which is, for an indoor Ironman, is pretty impressive. But considering he was talking most of the way through it to people online and live streaming pretty much the entire thing, that's ridiculous. It just shows how much of a class athlete he is. So if you can get the chance to check out some of the stuff he did throughout that race, and hopefully some other athletes do it as well, it's a really interesting insight into the inner workings of how they go about it when it's just them. There's no pressure on them, but they still want to put out a decent time, and they're having to almost describe their way through. Some interesting things we also got to see was his nutrition. So they went through how they fill the bottles using the Morton mixes, with like the bottles are labelled of how much fluid you need to fill it to, and you tip it in, and what consistency it's like and what it tastes like, and they really went in depth on that. So that was pretty cool to see as well, the type of nutrition strategies that someone like him is using. But then I'm going to move on to some of the other things that we've heard of, and some of the other things I've heard athletes trying to do in this time, almost leading into the isolation sort of periods, and almost pre some of the heavy restrictions we've got now, and what their plans were, but then also now some of the plans that we've heard over the last little while. So I was chatting to an athlete via Instagram who was still considering going and doing their 70.3 race. Obviously didn't end up probably happening. I haven't spoken to him since, but didn't end up happening, obviously, with not being able to go into state, things like that. But their plan was to go the course anyway, up at Port Macquarie, and just race, go and do a 1.9 open water swim, go and do the 90k bike on the same course. They know the course pretty well from previous races, so they can go and do that. Have some support out there as well. Obviously, someone driving around with them to make sure they've got enough fuel and things like that, as well, is obviously critical, because there's no aid stations. It's not an officially sanctioned race, so you need to make sure you've got some of those extras. And then go and do the run along the course, lock their bike up and do a transition, and try and make it as specific as they can. Just because their mindset, in terms of a motivation perspective, their mindset was, I've put all this hard work and not being able to officially race, I may as well use it for something good and go and do it and just test myself really and see where I'm at and how the training program works. So an interesting way to think about it is it's almost like a benchmarking test of, all right, did this training program achieve what I wanted it to? Obviously, I'm not going to have the perfect conditions of a race day, but at least I get to at least test a few things out and see, did most of it work? Was I on track for a good time? But I had to work around traffic and some traffic lights, things like that. So that slowed me down a bit. But if we take all of that out, I actually went on track for a pretty good shot. Interesting way to think about it. Probably not something that I personally do. It's up to the individual though. In this case, we've got an individual who just really wanted to race and really passionate about doing that course. So absolutely go for it if it's something you want to do. You've built up for it anyway, so getting out and doing a big session like that, your body's prepared for it. It's not like you're going in under prepared and just doing it for the sake of it. Another one I want to talk about that I'm seeing pop up heaps in the last little while And the last thing we will talk about is doing the Everesting challenges on Zwift. So what a lot of guys are doing are they're climbing Alpe du Zwift, so the main climb on the program. If you're familiar with it, I think from memory, most people are going to take probably sort of an hour thereabouts to climb it. I think you get about 1,000 meters of elevation each time you climb it, which means that doing the Everesting challenge, you just go up and down a few times and you're going to get there. Interesting thing to be working for. Obviously, it's a pretty sort of popular part of the Zwift course, but it's something that I'm seeing pop up more and more, and it's this type of challenge that I think a lot of people are starting to jump on board because others are as well, and it's a bit of a social experiment too on how many people are going to be doing it, and then everyone can start talking about their times and things like that to keep that connectivity together, share what they're doing in training, but also give them something to work towards. With limited access to things like treadmills, limited access to swimming, particularly for cyclists and triathletes, being able to jump on the bike is probably the only option that a lot of people are going to have. So doing a challenge like this is going to obviously build some of that cycling strength, because it's a tough challenge doing a lot of climbing. And I've even heard some athletes thinking about doing 10Ks worth of elevation, which is ridiculous, doing Alpe du Zwift 10 times in a row. Whatever your cup of tea is, probably not mine personally, but it's the type of thing that it's something to work towards. It's a goal that you can build yourself towards. Who knows how long this thing is going to last? Most people are sort of saying at the moment we could be still in lockdown and heavy isolation for 6 months, the better part of towards the end of the year. It's the type of thing, if you've only got a trainer and Zwift and a bike, at least you've got something to work towards, and you can train a few times a week and really focus on that. And it's something that, I mean, if you're going to be on the trainer anyway, may as well do something interesting like that, and a bit of a different goal. I know a lot of guys who traditionally ride a lot of flat are starting to do some hill climbing on Zwift, to something a bit different, maybe some time trialing challenges, going for some sprints as they wouldn't normally, just to mix it up and provide a bit of variety, because that can also be a motivating factor from a psychology perspective. Having something different and not allowing your training to get too monotonous and the same and just boring consistent can just be a way of really just bringing back a bit more interest and a bit of joy for what you're doing, which is going to help the overall situation. Staying as positive we can throughout this period is going to be the key to getting through and coming out the other side prepared and ready to go for when racing does kick back in. There's a bit of a reaction to a few of the things going on. I think it's pretty cool that there's some different challenges popping up. I know there's people who are running ultras in their apartments and doing laps of their houses and things like that. Let me know what some of your crazy challenges are. Leave them in the comments below. Keen to hear what you're doing in this time. Appreciate if you hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying some of the content so far and you're looking forward to some of the videos coming up. Hopefully you like this one. Hit subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.